What if I told you that the greatest threat to the first settlers in the Wild West was not Indian arrows or bandit bullets? In the endless prairies and snow-covered Rocky Mountains, the real invisible killer was the cold seeping through the cracks in log cabins. Frontier pioneers faced harsh winters with only stones, earth, and primitive tools at their disposal. They had to invent ways to keep warm that today seem like forgotten magic from ancient engineers. Watch the video to the end to find out how a simple hole in the floor could save the lives of an entire family, and what secret smoke trick allowed them to heat their cabin without even a hint of a fireplace. First, I'll reveal a secret that changes everything you know about frontier construction. Imagine that you have no bricks, no cement, and no way to build a classic English fireplace, which requires the skill of a mason. Settlers in the Wild West often use the thermal mass method, turning the structure of the house itself into a giant battery. They didn't just burn a fire, they charged massive granite boulders collected from the surrounding area with heat. These stones were laid in a special way in the center of the dwelling or along the walls, creating a battery that gave off heat all night long. This approach required a deep understanding of the physics of materials, accumulated by generations of hunters and trappers. Instead of heating the air, which quickly escapes through cracks, they heated a mass capable of retaining energy for hours. The stones were selected for size and density so that they would not crack from sudden temperature changes. Often, such boulders were buried deep in the floor foundation, creating a kind of modern underfloor heating. This saved firewood, which was a scarce resource on the open plains. Few people know that the pioneers borrowed this knowledge from local tribes who had lived in harmony with the harsh climate for centuries. They understood that an open flame provides light and instant heat, but it is heated stone that preserves life in a blizzard. In some huts, such stone masonry occupied up to a third of the usable space, becoming the main altar of survival. People slept on raised platforms next to these stones, using them as natural heaters. It was a real battle for every degree of warmth in conditions of complete isolation. Do you think you could survive at least one night in the icy wilderness, using only the energy of heated stones? Write your thoughts in the comments, because it is very important for us to know your opinion about the ingenuity of our ancestors. Every word you write helps us better understand the history of the exploration of the Great Lands. And be sure to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss out on unique facts about life on the frontier that aren't written about in textbooks. Together, we will reconstruct the picture of that heroic time. Are you ready to learn the shocking truth about what the floors in the homes of the poorest settlers look like? If there was no time to build a stone foundation, the pioneers used the tactic of earth heating, digging deep pits right in the middle of the room. This was not just a place for a fire, but a complex engineering system with underground air ducts. Cold air came in from outside through special gutters lined with bark or stone, feeding the flames with oxygen. The pit itself was lined with clay, which when fired turned into a kind of durable ceramic vessel. This system ensured incredibly clean combustion and minimized the amount of smoke inside the room. The clay walls of the pit heated up and worked on the principle of a Russian stove, distributing heat evenly across the entire area of the earthen floor. People literally walked on the heat source, which was critically important for maintaining health in permafrost conditions. Surprisingly, even in the most severe frosts, such huts managed to maintain a positive temperature. The earth acted as a powerful insulator, preventing heat from escaping into the void. Often, a heavy cast iron plate or simply a flat, dense boulder was placed over such a pit. This turned the open fire into a closed heating system and a surface for cooking meager meals. The entire life of the family revolved around this fiery center, which was never allowed to go out. The pioneers took turns on duty, making sure that the coals continued to smolder under a layer of ash. Losing the fire in the middle of winter often meant a death sentence for all the inhabitants of the hut. But the pit was only part of the system, because the heat also had to be directed to the right corners. Are you ready to find out what ordinary metal object turned a small spark into a powerful heat projector capable of warming an entire room? You've probably never heard of this unique secret because it seems too modern for the 19th century. Frontier pioneers masterfully used the laws of thermodynamics by applying heat reflectors made of polished tin or copper sheets. They understood that most of the energy from a regular fire goes to heating the walls, which simply absorb it. By installing curved metal screens behind the fire, they directed radiant heat to the center of the room. This allowed them to feel the heat even at a considerable distance from the source of combustion. Such screens were often made from old trays, box lids, or the paneling of broken vans. The metal was carefully rubbed with sand until it shone to maximize the reflective ability of the improvised mirror. This simple device almost doubled the heating efficiency without using extra firewood. In trappers' huts, such reflectors were a mandatory interior feature, hanging on special hooks. They were lightweight, mobile, and incredibly useful in conditions of constant relocation. Sometimes, specially treated animal skins stretched over a frame and covered with a layer of light-colored clay were used as reflectors. Although they reflected heat less efficiently than metal, their size allowed them to create entire heat zones in large rooms. Families could gather behind such a screen, protected from drafts and warmed by soft, reflected light. This created comfort in the harshest and gloomiest forest huts. Rocky Mountain trappers called these devices their silent helpers in the fight against the icy wind. Like this video if you admire the ingenuity of people who can get the most out of a simple piece of tin. Your support helps us find more and more rare and amazing stories from the lives of the pioneers of the Wild West. We appreciate every viewer who joins us in immersing themselves in the harsh, everyday life of the frontier. After all, history is not only made up of great battles, but also of small technological victories like this. Tell your friends about this video so that they too can appreciate the wisdom of past generations.
A reminder that the battle against convection is just as crucial as protecting against the cold air outside.
What you are about to learn will completely change your perception of comfort in the log cabins of the past. Some settlers built their homes on hillsides, using the natural landscape to create complex chimneys. They laid stone channels under the floor surface through which hot smoke from an external hearth was released. The smoke passed through this stone maze, giving off all its heat to the floor, and only then escaped through a tall pipe on the leeward side. This was an early and very effective form of central heating. This design eliminated smoke and soot inside the living area, which was a huge advantage. The air in the hut remained clean, and the floor was so warm that you could walk on it barefoot. Building such a system required time and precise calculations to ensure that the draft remained stable. Pioneers often spent weeks laying these underground pipes before erecting the walls. It was an investment in survival that paid off during the first harsh winter. The channels were regularly cleaned of soot through special inspection holes covered with heavy lids. The slightest crack in such a chimney could lead to the room filling with carbon monoxide, so the condition of the floor was monitored very carefully. The heat from such a smoke floor was gentle and very persistent. It did not disappear immediately after the last logs burned out in the hearth. This allowed people to rest properly without having to jump up every half hour to throw on another log. The skill of creating such systems was passed down from father to son as the greatest treasure. What do you think was the weakest link in this system, often leading to failures in construction due to a lack of tools? In the next chapter, we will look at even more primitive, but no less effective ways to survive in the cold. In frontier conditions, it was important not only to produce heat, but also to keep it inside a tiny space. Pioneers used the most unexpected materials to seal their dwellings, turning ordinary natural debris into high-quality insulation. The process, called chunking, involved filling the gaps between logs with a mixture of dry grass, horsehair, and sticky clay. Once dry, this mixture became as hard as rock and kept out even the strongest prairie winds. However, the clay had a tendency to crack, and it had to be renewed every autumn before the onset of cold weather. The interior walls of the huts were often covered with old newspapers or scraps of fabric, creating an additional layer of airspace. The paper, glued in several layers, worked like modern drywall, blocking cold air from the heated logs. If there were no newspapers, flour or sugar sacks were used, which were boiled beforehand to make them denser. Such walls looked poor, but they saved people from frostbite at night. Every scrap of material was valued more than gold if it could stop the draft. The floor also required special attention, as the cold often came from below. Settlers filled the space under the boards with a thick layer of dry pine needles, sawdust, or even sheep's wool. Over time, these materials were compressed, creating a reliable barrier between the living area and the frozen ground. The smell of pine needles became a constant companion of winter life, creating a specific atmosphere in the house. Careful insulation allowed the heat to be maintained even from a tiny brazier or a few coals. Many families also lined the outside of their homes' foundations with turf or bags of earth. This provided additional protection against the foundation freezing and protected against icy air currents creeping along the ground. From the outside, these huts resembled small hills, blending in with the surrounding landscape. Inside, it was quiet and dry, despite the blizzards raging outside on the Great Plains. The art of insulation was the first lesson that every new settler learned on the way to their dream. Guess how long heat could be maintained in a house without an open flame? The pioneers of the Wild West were masters of the art of coal management, understanding that open fire was wasteful. They used special metal vessels called braziers, which were filled with hot charcoal and ashes. These portable heaters could be moved from corner to corner, concentrating the heat where it was most needed at any given moment. Slow smoldering ensured a stable temperature for many hours without the need for constant supervision. These braziers often had carved lids, which not only decorated the home, but also prevented sparks from accidentally falling on clothing or the floor. The charcoal for them was prepared in advance by burning hardwoods such as oak or hickory. High-quality charcoal produced clean heat without excessive smoke, allowing braziers to be used even in tightly closed rooms. People often placed them under tables covered with long tablecloths, creating a warm cocoon for their feet during dinner. It was a simple but ingenious solution for saving resources. Experienced settlers knew how to lock the coals in the ashes so that they would remain alive until morning. In the evening, the bulk of the hot fuel was covered with a thick layer of ash, blocking oxygen access but maintaining the internal temperature. In the morning, all they had to do was stir the ashes and add a few pinches of wood to instantly revive the fire. This ritual was sacred to every family, as obtaining fire from scratch was a long and difficult process. The ability to handle ashes was considered a sign of maturity and thriftiness. But how did people cope with the fact that heat always rises, leaving the living area through the roof? In the next chapter, you will learn about unusual ceiling designs that literally caught hot air and returned it downwards. Ceilings in frontier cabins were designed with a simple but important rule in mind. Hot air always rises. Pioneers quickly noticed that most of the heat escaped under the roof and was wasted there. To prevent this from happening, they tried to reduce the amount of space that needed to be heated. This led to the creation of low false ceilings made of fabric or light wooden slats. These structures lowered the effective ceiling of the room, bringing it closer to human eye level. This created a closed airspace that heated up much faster than the entire room. The stove or hearth began to work more efficiently. Heat was no longer lost under the rafters. It was easier to maintain a stable temperature in such a hut. This was especially noticeable at night when the fire died down. Fabric ceilings were most often made of canvas or thick cloth. Such material was durable and affordable. The stretched fabric gradually heated up and began to give off heat downward. In essence, it worked like a large, soft radiator. The heat returned to where the people were. This significantly reduced the consumption of firewood. Saving fuel was vital. Firewood had to be harvested by hand and carried from far away. Every extra hour the stove burned meant additional effort and time. Thanks to the fabric ceilings, the fire could be kept lower. At the same time, The hut remained warm. This gave the pioneers a rare sense of control over the elements. Sometimes these ceilings were made in multiple layers. Dry grass, wool, or moss was laid between the layers of fabric. This increased thermal insulation and slowed down the escape of heat upwards. In essence, it was an early form of an insulated suspended ceiling. It blocked the cold coming from the roof and attic. Even in severe frosts, the difference was immediately noticeable. The pioneers noticed that in houses with such structures, frost appeared on the walls much later. In ordinary huts, ice patterns appeared almost immediately after sunset. Here, however, the walls remained dry longer. This meant that the heat was retained inside and the moisture did not freeze. Such small details had a direct impact on people's health. During the dark hours of the day, the warmed fabric reflected the light of the fire and glowed with a soft, warm hue. This created a feeling of comfort that was so lacking on the frontier. The room seemed smaller and safer. The psychological effect was no less important than the physical one. In such conditions, it was easier to survive the long winter. On particularly cold nights, people went even further and built a kind of canopy over their beds out of heavy blankets. These structures were either suspended or simply thrown over the top. This created a small enclosed area inside the room. The warmth of the human body and the heat from the stove were retained inside. This created another level of protection from the cold. Inside such a cocoon, the temperature could be 10 degrees higher than in the rest of the hut. The difference was immediately noticeable, especially at night. Children and the elderly slept there. They were the ones who were protected first and foremost. The pioneers understood the simple principle of survival well. It was not necessary to heat the entire house, but only the space where people were located. Everything else was considered a waste of energy and fuel. These decisions were born out of necessity and observation, but it was precisely these decisions that allowed them to survive the harshest winters of the frontier. When blizzards buried the huts up to the roof, the settlers did not rush to clear the snow from the walls. They knew that tightly packed snow is one of the best natural insulators in the world. The snowdrifts that covered the house created an extra layer of protection that kept the heat from escaping through the logs. Inside this snow fortress, it became surprisingly quiet and much warmer, as the wind could no longer blow the heat out through the cracks. People often deliberately threw snow onto the walls to reinforce this natural barrier. The snow worked like insulation, retaining internal energy thanks to millions of air bubbles trapped in the crystals. If the hut was built correctly, even in 30-degree frost, the temperature inside remained stable. The main thing was to make sure that the chimney or ventilation hole remained open and did not become clogged with ice. Many pioneers described the winters spent under the snow as the most peaceful and warmest periods of their frontier exploration. It was coexistence with nature, not a struggle against it. However, snow insulation had a downside. In the spring, excess moisture could damage the logs. Settlers had to remove the snow in time, as soon as the first thaw began. But in the middle of winter, it was a real lifesaver for those who did not have enough firewood. Snow turned from an enemy into an ally, creating a reliable shield against the icy breath of the north. This lesson in survival was passed down from hunters to farmers, helping them to establish themselves in new lands. Trappers and mountain hunters were constantly looking for ways to keep their temporary dwellings warm. They rarely had access to ready-made stoves or complex structures. Therefore, they used whatever they could find or dismantle. Metal pipes from old muskets or wagon parts were often used. These items became the basis for primitive but functional convectors. One end of such a pipe was inserted directly into the hearth or next to it. The other end was directed to the far corner of the hut, where the bed was usually located. This arrangement was not chosen by chance. It was in this area that it was most important for a person to stay warm at night. The fire remained in one place and the heat spread further. This significantly increased the chances of surviving the frost. Hot air passed through a metal channel and heated its walls. Then it came out on the other side, creating a directed flow of heat. This flow slowly warmed the space away from the hearth. A temperature difference appeared in the hut, which was immediately noticeable. People no longer had to freeze in the coldest corner. This approach made it possible to heat remote parts of the dwelling without having to build a separate fire there. This was especially important in small and cramped huts. An additional hearth increased the risk of fire. In addition, fuel was often in short supply. Saving firewood was a matter of survival. Such systems were extremely fire hazardous and required caution. The metal became very hot and could set the wood on fire. Therefore, the pipes were wrapped in wet leather or covered with stones. Sometimes a layer of clay was used. All this reduced the risk of fire. But even with such protection, constant monitoring was required. People couldn't just go to bed and forget about the structure. They had to regularly check the condition of the pipes in the hearth. The slightest mistake could lead to a fire. Nevertheless, such measures made it possible to sleep in relative warmth. In frontier conditions, this was a huge advantage. Some pioneers went even further in their experiments. They connected several pipes into long chains. These pipelines stretched along the entire wall of the hut. This allowed the heat to be distributed more evenly. It took time and skill, but the result was worth the effort. In fact, it was a prototype of modern heating systems. It did not appear in cities, but in conditions of complete isolation from civilization. People learned from their own mistakes. Every successful experiment became valuable knowledge. Such solutions were born out of necessity, not comfort. Metal cooled quickly, so such systems only worked when the main fire was burning actively. As soon as the fire weakened, the heat disappeared. This forced people to keep the flame burning all night. Someone was on duty, throwing wood on the fire. Sleep was often interrupted. Sometimes, instead of metal pipes, long gutters hollowed out of logs were used. They were coated with a thick layer of fireproof clay. Such structures were less effective, but had their advantages. They were easier to make in the forest without metal. The materials were at hand. These channels directed warm air under benches or beds. As a result, small areas of relative comfort appeared. Even a few degrees made a difference. Each hut on the frontier became a unique survival laboratory. People were constantly looking for ways to cheat the harsh reality. Today, these methods may seem primitive and dangerous, but they were what allowed people to survive in inhuman conditions. Without these solutions, there would have been no settlements or roads. These forgotten technologies became the basis for the development of new lands. They helped build a country where it seemed impossible to live. Survival in a cold house required not only technical skills, but also special psychological fortitude. Families learned to live in a confined space, where each member of the group played a role in maintaining thermal balance. Shared meals, working together, and sleeping in the same area helped to maintain not only physical warmth, but also morale. Loneliness in a cold climate often led to fatal mistakes, so the pioneers tried to stick together. Warmth in the Wild West was a symbol of civilization and home, separating man from wild, hostile nature. Caring for the fire was a manifestation of love and responsibility for loved ones. Even in the poorest huts, people tried to keep at least a tiny flame burning, reminding them of the hope for spring. Studying these methods allows us to gain a deeper understanding of what the people who settled the frontier went through. Their experience is a tribute to human ingenuity and the will to live in the most extreme conditions. We hope that this immersion in the forgotten heating methods of the Wild West has made you look differently at the familiar comforts of your home. The history of the frontier is full of such amazing details, where ingenuity replaced high technology and knowledge of nature became the main tool for survival. These people didn't just build houses, they created systems that defied death itself. Which of the technologies mentioned did you find most impressive or unusual? Suggest topics for our future videos that you would like to learn more about in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel to continue exploring the most exciting pages of American frontier history with us.
Very good, Pa.